morning, everybody, and welcome to Museum Munchkins. I'm Mr. Nick, and today we are talking all about the giant ground sloth, which is an animal that lived during the Ice Age. And we're going to start off by singing a ground sloth song if you want to stand up on your feet. So in this song, I don't know if you've ever heard of a sloth before. Have you ever heard of a sloth before? So sloths are animals that still live around today down in South America, and they're known for being really slow. And so today in our song, we're going to be practice being slow just like a sloth. But you know, I get really excited when I do Munchkins, so we might go a little bit fast too, but you'll have to remind me to slow down like a sloth while we sing this song. And we're going to listen for what we're going to do, for the actions that we're going to do along with this song while we sing. Are you ready? Great, here we go. We'll start off kind of a normal speed to start, so we can all hear the directions. Walk, walk, sloths can walk, 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 sloths can walk, 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 sloths can walk, we are walking now. Can you walk around just normal? Oh, but you know what? Fast, fast, walk real fast, 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 walk real fast, 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 walk real fast, walk real fast now. Oh no, like a sloth. So we want to go slow, slow, walk real slow, 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 walk real slow, 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 walk real slow, walking like a sloth. Yeah, because they walk kind of slow when they walk. The next thing we're going to do is pick some leaves. So we're going to reach way up high and grab some leaves. Are you ready? Pick, pick, pick some leaves. Pick, pick, pick some leaves. Pick, pick, pick some leaves. Pick some leaves to eat. Pick, pick, pick some leaves. Pick, pick, pick some leaves. Pick, pick, pick some leaves. Pick some leaves to eat. No, like a sloth. We want to go slow. So are you ready? We're gonna pick some leaves. Pick some leaves. Pick some leaves. Pick some leaves to eat. Very good. Yeah, we want to go nice and slow like a sloth. Are you ready? The next thing we're gonna do is all those leaves we just picked, we're gonna chew them up. And chew them up in our mouths. Are you ready? So we're gonna chew those leaves, chew those leaves, chew those leaves, chew those leaves now. Chew those leaves, chew those leaves, chew those leaves, chew those leaves to eat. No! Like a sloth! We wanna go slowly. So are you ready to chew some leaves? Chew some leaves. Chew some leaves. Chew those leaves to eat. Very good. Now we're gonna do one more. Are you ready? We're gonna swim. Sometimes sloths like to go swimming when they need to get from place to place or across a river. So we're gonna swim, swim, swim across, swim, swim, swim across, swim, swim, swim across to find some leaves to eat. Swim, swim, swim across, swim, swim, swim across, swim, swim, swim across, swim across to find some leaves to eat. No! Like a sloth! We're gonna swim, swim, swim across, swim, swim, swim across, swim, swim, swim across to find some leaves to excellent job going maybe really fast and then slowing down just like a sloth. I'm going to set my guitar down so we can talk all about giant ground sloths. All right, so like I said, have you ever seen a sloth before? Yeah, so sloths are really interesting animals that live around now down in South America. I've got my globe here so I can show you where they live. They live down here, sort of like in the Amazon rainforest, maybe up into Central America just a little bit, places like Costa Rica. So we find sloths down in more tropical areas now, and there are two types of sloths. Well, really 6 different types, but they come in kind of 2 different types. So they either they have 3 toes, and we call those 3-toed sloths, or they have 2 toes, and we call those 2-toed sloths. Very good, yeah. And they are called sloths because, like we said in our song, they move really slowly. In fact, a sloth moves so slowly, they can only move about 13 feet every minute. That's a really slow animal. So they move pretty slow, and they move so slowly that algae actually grows on their back. And that's one of the things that they eat, is the algae that grows on their back. So there are sloths that live around in South America now, but a long time ago, there were sloths that lived all from in South America up through Central America and even into North America in places like Florida and South Carolina. Things called giant ground sloths. And most of the sloths that we have around today are kind of small. They're only about this big. They don't weigh very much. But the ground sloths that we had around here in the United States back during the Ice Age were enormous. They could grow up to be about 20 feet tall. That's about as big as a giraffe. And they could weigh up to 6,000 or 7,000 pounds. That's a really, really, really big sloth. And like I said, they lived down here in Florida, where the climate was still a little bit like it is today, but because it was the Ice Age, that it was a little bit different. So it was kind of warm there, a little bit colder than it is today. But if you got up into northern Florida, it started to get a little bit colder. The climate in Florida was still kind of dry and a little warm, but Florida was actually a lot bigger than it is today too. So Florida used to go all the way out into the Gulf of Mexico and used to be about 3 or 4 times as big as it is today because the oceans were a lot lower. Because during the Ice Age, all of the water from the oceans was trapped inside ice that covered the rest of the continents. So during the Ice Age, it was pretty cold. Have you ever heard of that before, the Ice Age? So we might think when we hear that it was really cold during the Ice Age, but even though it was the Ice Age, it wasn't super, super cold all the time. There were still summers and winters where grass and other things would grow and there would be things for animals to eat. It wasn't just ice and snow all the time. So, but giant ground sloths were these huge animals that lived around there. And just to give you an example of how huge they were, this is just one of a giant ground sloth's big, giant claws. It's bigger than my head. So these animals were really, really big, but they were also really, really slow. Just like sloths that are around today were. They were big and they liked to move around and find a nice tall group of trees that they could reach way up into, just like we did in our song, to grab branches, and they would pull the branches down, and then they would use their lips. They had special lips called prehensile lips. Can you say that word with me? Prehensile. Yeah, how about let's say it really quietly? Prehensile. How about, can we say it really loud? Prehensile! How about, oh, can we say it really slowly like a sloth? Yeah, and that means that just like the tip of an elephant's trunk, they could kind of grab things and pinch them with their lips, just like we can with our fingers, or like I said, like an elephant can. With the tip of its trunk, they could grab things, and they would use those prehensile lips to grab just the leaves and fruits that they wanted to eat off the tops of trees. They were pretty interesting, and to get up really high, they used their big, strong tail, kind of like a third leg. So they had like a tripod then, with their tail sticking out the back and their two legs. They could reach up really high to get into the tops of trees where there's nice, soft, fresh, green leaves that they loved to eat. And they were pretty picky eaters. They really only liked eating those nice, soft, fresh leaves at the tops of trees. We don't find them eating very much else. Although we find them eating some other plants, but they really love that stuff at the tops of trees. Do you have a favorite food, maybe? Yeah, maybe like just like a sloth's favorite food is the nice, fresh, soft leaves on the tops of those trees. Yeah, I bet you do. You can let me know what your favorite food is down there in the comments while we're talking about giant ground sloths today. And they didn't just use these big, giant claws to protect themselves. Or to find leaves, they also use them to protect themselves. Because there were other animals around during the Ice Age. Other animals like woolly mammoths, and giant beavers, and saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves, really big wolves. These animals like saber-toothed cats and dire wolves that wanted to eat the giant ground sloths. So they would use their big, powerful claws to protect themselves from those animals. And when you get to be as big as a giant ground sloth is, most animals, even big ferocious saber-toothed cats and dire wolves, would leave you alone, especially if you had hands full of these big, giant claws. And you know what? I love learning about animals like the giant ground sloth, and I brought a book that can help us learn even more about the giant ground sloth. Would you like to see it? Great. So we're going to read this book together called Ground Sloths. And while we read this book, after our book, we're going to do an activity together. And so while we read this book, if you have any questions about giant ground sloths, you can let us know, and then we're going to answer some in a little bit while we're working on our craft. But let's read this ground sloth book. Books are really great because we can learn a lot from books. And we'll be able to see what a ground sloth looked like. A strange beast. Slow, heavy footsteps move through the forest. Crack! Giant claws break a branch. A big ground sloth chomps on the leaves. He kind of looks like a big giant raccoon, how they've made him here with his striped tail, doesn't he? About 35,000 years ago, ground sloths roamed the land. Some were the size of black bears. Others were as big as elephants. Sloths lived in North and South America during the Ice Age. They made their homes in caves, grasslands, and forests. So this is a ground sloth that lives in a cave. Too big to climb trees, ground sloths lived on the ground. They walked on all fours with their clawed feet turned in. So you can see how they're kind of walking with their claws turned in so they don't step on them and break them. So they kind of, instead of walking flat, they kind of curled their hands and their feet underneath like that so they wouldn't hurt their claws. Big and strong. Ground sloths had shaggy fur and sharp claws. They stood on strong back legs to reach the leafy treetops. Thick tails help them to balance. Along with leaves, sloths ate twigs and grasses. Their powerful jaws and flat teeth were good for grinding up plants. Gentle giants. Ground sloths lived on their own. Sloths were slow and gentle, but if a sloth was attacked, it would fight back. A fighting ground sloth stood up to look bigger. Swipe! It swung its front claws at predators, such as the saber-toothed cat. There's that saber-toothed cat I was talking about. You can see how big its teeth are. About 10,000 years ago, Earth changed. The planet warmed, human hunters moved in. With less food and more predators, ground sloths became extinct. So we don't have any ground sloths who live on our planet anymore, but they used to live around here during the Ice Age, and they were such interesting, amazing animals. And now we're going to do a really fun ground sloth activity. Are you ready? All right, let me push my cart forward a little bit so we can see what we're working on. Get behind here, we can work on some stuff. In order to do this activity, we're going to need just a few things. First, I'm going to need your questions so I can answer them, but we're going to need some scissors and a drinking straw, a plastic bag like this one, something to color with. I've got some colored pencils, and we're going to need one of these giant ground sloth coloring sheets. So we have these on our website that you can link to from our Facebook, or just go straight to our website to find these to print off. Or if you want to draw your own ground sloth for this activity, you can do that too. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I need to color my ground sloth. So I'm going to pour out some of my colored pencils. Let's see, I think I'll need some brown, and I'm going to use some, let's see, some orange too. Maybe some orange for his eye. And I'm going to use some gray for his nose. So I'm going to need those three colors to color my ground sloth. And while I color him in, to start, let's answer some questions. All right, so Noelle wants to know, why do sloths move so slow? That's a great question, Noelle. So sloths move slow because it helps them to conserve energy. So when you move really fast, you burn up a lot of energy and a lot of the food that you ate. So in order to save that, so sloths don't need to eat as much to get more energy, they move really slowly. It also helps them to camouflage. So in the forests where they live, they move really slowly because that helps them to blend in with their surroundings. When they move really slow, other animals and predators that might want to eat them can't see them because they're moving really slowly, or even because they're sitting still. So giant ground sloths, they would move really slowly for that first reason, to help them save energy while they moved around. But sloths that we have around today, they use that slow movement to help them save energy, but also so that they can stay hidden from other animals that might want to find them. So that's a great question. Oh man, this giant ground sloth is really big. It might take me a little bit to color him in all the way. I gotta get the brown down on his arms and his belly and his back. So while we do that, let's answer another question. Joanna wants to know, what are sloths' predators today? That's a great question. So sloths don't have many predators because sloths live way up in trees. the sloths that we have around today, they live really high up in trees, so lots of predators can't get to them. But some predators, like jaguars and leopards and things, cats that can climb trees, they sometimes will eat sloths. And then, just like during the Ice Age and the giant ground sloths, humans are predators of sloths too. So lots of people think that sloths, because sloths that we have today are so slow and cute, that they might make a really good pet. But they're wild animals, and we should leave them in the wild because they don't really make very good pets. They need a very specific place to live, and if we take them out of that place to live, they don't usually do very well. So sometimes when sloths are rescued and they go to places like zoos and things so we can see them, those are sloths that can't live in the wild anymore. So those sloths are okay living at places like zoos or things so we can learn about them, but most sloths, people should just leave them alone where they live in the forest. All right, so I've got my giant ground sloth all colored here, and now I need to cut him out. So I'm going to cut around the outside of the sloth carefully while we answer another question. Ollie wants to know if they dig with their claws. Yes, they do, Ollie. So, giant ground sloths and sloths that we have around today, the sloths that we have around today don't dig too much. But giant ground sloths absolutely would have used their claws sometimes to dig. They would dig through the snow if there was some snow around where they were living to get to plants underneath. Or they could also dig with their claws in the dirt to get down to the nice roots that they like to eat from plants too. So that's a lot more work than just sitting in one place and pulling branches to your mouth so you can eat the leaves off of them. But if they were in a place where there wasn't very many trees and they needed to find food, they could absolutely use those big giant claws for digging. All right, so I'm almost done cutting them out, and when I finish cutting out around the whole sloth, I'm going to save this paper that came from around the sloth because we're going to use that for our craft too. We're going to recycle it and find a different use for it. Alrighty, and one more cut. There we go. I've got my sloth all cut out. And now, what I'm going to do with this paper is I'm going to kind of cut it into little bits and pieces that I can kind of make confetti with. Have you ever made confetti before? So that's confetti is really fun at like parties, or sometimes you might have seen it at a parade or on New Year's Eve. It's like lots of little tiny pieces of paper and sometimes glittery stuff all mixed together that kind of makes sparkles in the air and stuff, and it floats around. So I'm going to make kind of a snow confetti using this extra white paper that I cut off from around the outside of my sloth. So while I cut this up, let's answer another question, okay? So Allie wants to know why they don't want to be fast. Well, that's a great question, Allie, and we kind of answered that before. Remember, so they like to move really slow because that helps them to save energy. If they don't move around very much, then they're not using a lot of energy, and the food that they eat goes a lot further in keeping their body warm and keeping their body going. So when they move really slow like that, then they don't burn up a lot of that energy. And sloths are also pretty sleepy animals. Sloths like to sleep a lot of the time too. So that's another reason why they don't move very much, because you don't move very fast when you're sleeping, do you? No, not too fast. All right, so I've got some of my paper cut into strips like this now, and I'm going to cut those little strips into little tiny squares. And while I do that, let's answer another question, okay? So Rachel wants to know if a crawling baby is faster than a sloth. That's a great question. I would say probably. Babies can crawl a lot faster. And if you want to see if you're faster than a sloth, you can find a tape measure around your house and measure out 15 15 feet and see how long it takes you to walk that 15 feet. You can have someone time you, see how long it takes you to walk that 15 feet. A sloth, it will take them about a minute to go that 15 feet. So if a baby or you can go in that 15 feet faster than 1 minute, then you're faster than a sloth. They move pretty slow. They move a little bit faster when they're in the water and they're swimming across rivers or between islands and things, because sloths do that sometimes. They're a little bit faster in the water, but they're still pretty slow. That's a great question. Are they faster than a baby? I suppose, though, too, if you had a really fast baby or a really slow baby, then it might be a close race if there was a really slow baby versus a sloth. Or a baby who wasn't very good at crawling might lose a race to a sloth. All right, I'm almost done cutting up these strips. They take a little while because there's so many of them, but I need a lot of these little squares for our craft today. So let's answer another question while I finish cutting up this last little group of strips. Eli and Lucas want to know, how did giant ground sloths become extinct? That's a great question. So, like we heard at the end of our story, the end of our book today, giant ground sloths, because they lived during the Ice Age. And during that time when ground sloths went extinct, the world was starting to get warmer. It was starting to change. As the world got warmer, the oceans began to rise around Florida and South Carolina, where they lived. So they had less and less and less space to live, to survive on. And then there were also humans in the area who started hunting the giant ground sloths so they could eat them or use them for food, or use them to make their clothing, using their fur and stuff. So it's a little bit of they got hunted, and it's a little bit of the climate changed too much for them to be able to survive anymore. All right, I'm going to take my plastic bag now and open it up, and now I'm going to dump all of this white confetti paper that I cut up into my plastic bag. Perfect, it's all down there at the bottom. And then I'm going to put my sloth in there. Now you don't have to do this, but I'm going to use a couple pieces of tape on my sloth to kind of hold him in place on the back of the bag. So while I stick him in the bag, let's answer another question. Oh, Allie and Rachel also want to know if they're related to capybaras at all. That's a great question. No, they are not. Even though they look a little bit like a capybara, don't they? They kind of have a big head like a capybara and they're covered in fur. But capybaras are related to other animals that we find on our planet. So they're actually a type of rodent. And sloths aren't rodents, so they're rodents like mice and hamsters and rats and squirrels. So they're related to those animals, not to giant ground sloths or regular sloths even. All right, so now I've got my sloth in my bag here, and I've got him taped on there so you can see him still, and I've got all that white confetti at the bottom, and now I'm going to zip my bag closed, but not all the way. I'm going to leave a little bit open on the end here so I can stick my straw inside here. Perfect, and now I'm going to use my straw and I'm going to blow and fill this bag up a little bit. All right, now that I have my bag filled up, it's all filled up and puffy like that. You can see my ground sloth in the back and all of that white confetti paper at the bottom. That's going to be our snow, because sloths lived during the Ice Age. So now if I wiggle my straw around while I blow in there, I can make the snow blow all over the place. Kind of like a snow globe. Pretty cool. If you have extra paper at home too, I made another one just like this. But instead of white paper this time, I used some extra scraps of green paper I had sitting around because sloths like to eat leaves, right? So instead of a snowstorm like this sloth is trapped in, I can make this sloth have a leaf storm. Pretty cool, right? So you can use any colored paper that you want to make your little storm inside your bag for your sloth. You can use white for the snow or green for leaves, or maybe you want to make a rainbow storm to have your sloth inside. But either way, that's our craft for today, making these little snowstorm bags for our giant ground sloths. Again, you'll need a bag, our sloth cutout, a straw, some scissors, and something to color with. Thank you guys so much for visiting with us today. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you next time.